Imagine standing on a beach at the very edge of the known world. Behind you is everything your people have ever known. The land, the hills, the rivers, the graves of your ancestors. And in front of you is the ocean. Not a lake, not a river you can see across. An open, endless, terrifying expanse of water that stretches all the way to a flat, empty horizon, and as far as anyone can tell, simply never ends. You cannot see what's on the other side. You don't even know if there is another side. There are no maps, no compass, no metal, no engines, no charts. Nothing but the water, the sky, and a small boat made of wood and reeds. And you decide to get in. And you point that little boat away from everything you have ever known toward a horizon with nothing behind it, and you start to paddle. You have no idea if you will ever see land again. You have no idea if there is any land to see. Behind you, your family watches from the shore until you become a dot and then nothing. Ahead of you is only water and sky and the vast unknown, and still you go. This actually happened. Not once, but again and again across tens of thousands of years. Your ancestors did this. Ordinary human beings with no technology we would recognize as navigational deliberately launched themselves out onto the open ocean and crossed distances so vast it seems impossible, arriving on tiny specks of land hidden in the middle of the largest oceans on Earth. And they did it without a single one of the tools we think you need to cross the sea. So, how did ancient humans cross oceans, find invisible islands, and colonize a planet before compasses, before charts, before large ships, before any of it? The answer is one of the most breathtaking stories of human intelligence ever told. Because it turns out they weren't lost or lucky. They had a technology more sophisticated than any compass, and it was hidden in the most surprising place of all. Let's set sail. To understand just how astonishing this is, you first have to grasp the scale of what our ancestors actually did. And the first great sea crossing takes us back an almost unbelievable distance in time to the peopling of Australia. Today, Australia is surrounded by ocean. But even during the Ice Age, when sea levels were far lower and much more land was exposed, Australia and New Guinea were never connected to Asia by a walkable land bridge. To get there, you had to cross open water. Deep, treacherous open ocean in some places, at least 100 kilometers wide, far enough that from the starting shore you very likely could not even see your destination. It was a genuine leap into the unknown. And here is the staggering part. Archaeological sites in northern Australia, like a rock shelter called Majid Bebe, contain the remains of human occupation dating back around 65,000 years. 65,000 years ago, human beings built watercraft capable of crossing the open sea. And they made that crossing arriving on a continent no human had ever set foot on before. This is by many measures the oldest hard evidence of humans using boats anywhere on the planet. Before there was farming, before there were cities, before there was writing, before almost anything we associate with civilization, humans were sailing across open oceans. To put that in perspective, consider what else was happening 65,000 years ago. Neanderthals still walked the earth. The great cave paintings of Europe had not yet been made. The last ice age still had tens of thousands of years to run. And in the middle of all that, a group of Homo sapiens looked out across 100 kilometers of open sea, built boats, and crossed it into a land filled with giant, unfamiliar creatures. Marsupial predators and reptiles larger than any they had ever seen. They had no idea what waited on the other side. They went anyway. This was quite possibly the boldest single act of exploration in the entire story of our species up to that point, and it happened so long ago that the scale of the achievement is almost impossible to hold in the mind. Now, for a long time, people assumed this must have been an accident. Maybe a few unlucky fishermen got swept out to sea in a storm and washed up on Australia by pure chance. It's a comforting idea because it doesn't require us to believe that Stone Age people were bold, intelligent ocean voyagers. But scientists actually tested this idea, and what they found demolishes it. Researchers used sophisticated computer models of the ancient ocean currents, the winds, and the visibility between islands. And they ran the numbers on whether people could have reached Australia purely by accident, by drifting. And the answer was clear: accidental drift almost never works. The probability of randomly washing up on Sahul, the ancient combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea, was extremely low. But the moment they modeled people who were deliberately trying to get there, choosing a good time to depart, and making even a small, steady effort to paddle in a chosen direction, the odds of a successful crossing shot up dramatically. The conclusion was inescapable. This was not an accident. These were intentional voyages. 65,000 years ago, people looked out at an ocean they could not see across and they chose to cross it on purpose. They planned it. They aimed. They committed. That is not the behavior of primitive brutes. That is exploration in its purest and bravest form. So, our ancestors were deliberate ocean voyagers almost unimaginably long ago. But this only deepens the central mystery. How did they know where they were going? How do you aim for land you cannot see and steer a course across open water with no instruments at all? To answer that, we have to travel to the greatest ocean navigators the world has ever known, peoples of the Pacific. Look at a map of the Pacific Ocean. It is almost incomprehensibly vast, covering a third of the entire surface of the planet. And scattered across it like a handful of sand thrown across a ballroom floor are thousands of tiny islands, many of them mere specks, separated from their nearest neighbors by hundreds or even thousands of miles of empty water. And yet over thousands of years, a seafaring people found and settled nearly every single one of them. From the edge of Asia, they pushed out across the open Pacific island by island in an epic expansion that eventually reached Hawaii in the northeastern, island in the east, and New Zealand in the south. A triangle of ocean bigger than any empire that has ever existed. They colonized the largest ocean on Earth in canoes without instruments. It is arguably the single greatest feat of exploration in human history. So, how on earth did they do it? Before we get to how they navigated, we have to appreciate what they were sailing in, because the boat itself was a marvel of engineering. These were not crude rafts. The great voyaging canoes of the Pacific were double-hulled, two long hulls lashed together side by side with a platform built across them, creating a vessel that was fast, stable, and capable of carrying dozens of people along with everything needed to start a new colony. And that last point is crucial. When these voyagers set out, they were not just exploring. They were carrying the seeds of civilization with them: pigs, chickens, and dogs, taro, yam, breadfruit, and banana plants, tools, and the knowledge to rebuild their whole world on a new shore. They planned these voyages as deliberate colonizing expeditions, packing a floating ark of everything a new island would need to sustain human life. Think about the confidence that requires. You don't load your canoe with breeding animals and precious crop cuttings unless you fully intend to find land and stay. Archaeologists can actually trace this expansion through the pottery these people left behind. A distinctive style of decorated pottery called lapita appears across a huge sweep of the Pacific, and by following it from island to island, researchers can map the astonishing speed and reach of this migration. The Lapita Trail shows a people surging out across thousands of miles of ocean in a matter of centuries. A burst of exploration so rapid and so bold, it still amazes the scientists who study it. These were the ancestors of the Polynesians, and they were on the move, leaping from island to island across the largest ocean on the planet. So how on earth did they steer? The answer is a body of knowledge so sophisticated it deserves to be called a science. It's called wayfinding, and it is one of the most beautiful examples of human intelligence ever developed. A wayfinder, a master navigator, carried no compass, no map, no instrument of any kind. Instead, they carried something far more powerful, an encyclopedic knowledge of the natural world, memorized, refined, and passed down through generations. The wayfinder didn't read instruments. They read the ocean, the sky, and the living world itself. Let me show you how. The first and greatest tool was the sky. The navigator memorized the rising and setting points of dozens, even hundreds of stars. As you may know, stars rise in the east and set in the west, and crucially, each star rises and sets at a specific, reliable point on the horizon. So the navigator built in their mind what's called a star compass, a mental map of the entire horizon divided up by the points where they knew particular stars would appear and disappear. By watching which star was rising or setting at a given point, they always knew their direction. As one star climbed too high in the sky to be useful, they would switch to the next star rising along the same path. All night long they read the turning sky like the face of a great clock holding their course by the stars. But the stars aren't always visible. Clouds cover them. The sun blazes all day. So the navigator needed more, and this is where wayfinding becomes truly genius. Because the greatest wayfinders could navigate using the ocean itself, they learned to read the swells. Swells are the long, steady waves generated by distant, persistent winds rolling across the ocean in remarkably consistent directions, often for thousands of miles. And a master navigator could feel these swells, distinguishing several different swell patterns crossing the ocean at once, each coming from a different direction. Here is the almost unbelievable part. A skilled wayfinder could lie down in the bottom of the canoe and navigate by feeling the way the boat rocked and pitched beneath them, sensing the angle at which the swells passed under the hull. In pitch darkness under total cloud cover with no star and no landmark in sight, they could hold their course simply by feeling the rhythm of the ocean against their body. They turned their own skin into an instrument. The boat itself became a needle and the swells were the lines on the compass. And they read the living world too. As they neared land that was still far below the horizon, the ocean began to whisper clues. Certain seabirds fly out from land to fish each morning and return each evening, so spotting a particular kind of bird flying home at dusk could point the navigator toward an island still miles away unseen. The navigators watched the flight paths of these birds like signposts in the sky. They read the clouds, knowing that certain cloud formations tend to gather and hover over islands, so a distant stationary cloud on the horizon might be crowning hidden land. They even read the water itself for an island far over the horizon, bends and reflects. The ocean swells around it, creating subtle changes in the wave patterns that a master navigator could detect from far away. Sensing the presence of land, they could not yet see, by the way, that land disturbed the sea. Put it all together and the picture is astonishing. The Wayfinder held in their memory alone a vast integrated model of the entire world around them. The stars overhead, the swells beneath the birds in the air, the clouds on the horizon, the currents, the winds, the color of the water. They wove all of it together continuously in their mind to answer one question with life or death stakes. Where am I and which way is home? They didn't have instruments because they didn't need instruments. They were the instrument. And there's one more layer of genius that shows just how deep this system went. Micronesian navigators used a mental technique that researchers call ATAC. Here's the mind-bending idea. As the canoe sailed toward its destination, the navigator did not imagine themselves moving across a fixed sea the way you'd trace your finger along a map. Instead, they imagined their canoe as sitting still while the islands moved past them. In their mind, they tracked a reference island off to the side, out of sight below the horizon, and mentally marked it, moving backward against the star points as the voyage progressed. By keeping track of how far that unseen reference island had moved, they always knew how much of the journey was complete and how far remained. It's an entirely different way of thinking about motion and space than the one you were taught, and it allowed the navigator to hold their exact progress in their head across weeks at sea without a single written note. It is a cognitive tool of breathtaking sophistication, and it existed entirely inside the human mind. And becoming a navigator who could do all this took a lifetime. A young apprentice might begin as a child learning the star compass by arranging pieces of coral or shell in a circle on the sand, each stone marking where a star would rise. They memorized chants that encoded sailing directions between islands. They spent years feeling the swells, reading the birds, absorbing the accumulated ocean wisdom of their elders. To become a master navigator, a palu, was to complete one of the most demanding educations any human culture has ever devised, an education with no books held entirely in memory, where a single mistake at sea could kill your entire crew. These were not amateurs who got lucky. They were the products of a rigorous, generations-deep tradition of learning. Now, you might be thinking that all of this sounds almost too incredible to be true, that maybe it's a romanticized legend, and that no human could really cross thousands of miles of open ocean without a compass. For a while, many Western scholars thought exactly that. They doubted that ancient Pacific voyaging could have been intentional and skilled, dismissing it as accident and drift. And then in the 20th century, something happened that silenced the doubters forever. In the 1970s, a group in Hawaii called the Polynesian Voyaging Society decided to prove that traditional wayfinding really worked. They built a magnificent double-hulled voyaging canoe using traditional designs and named it Hōkūleʻa after a star. Their plan was to sail it from Hawaii to Tahiti, a journey of well over 2,000 miles across open ocean using no modern instruments whatsoever. But there was a problem. The knowledge of long-distance wayfinding had very nearly died out. Across the whole of Polynesia, the old navigators were gone. So they searched and they found a man named Mau Piailug. Mau was a master navigator, a palu from the tiny island of Satawal in Micronesia, one of the last people alive who still carried the complete traditional non-instrument navigational knowledge learned by heart in the old way passed down through his family in an unbroken chain reaching back countless generations. And in 1976, Mau Piailug climbed aboard Hōkūleʻa, and without a single instrument, guided by only the stars, the sun, the swells, the birds, and the knowledge held in his mind, he navigated that canoe across more than 2,000 miles of open Pacific from Hawaii to Tahiti, and he made it. He found a tiny island in the vast ocean exactly as his ancestors had, using nothing but his memory and his senses. The details of that voyage are almost beyond belief. For weeks, Mau barely slept, resting only in short snatches because the navigator can never fully let go of the picture in his mind. If he lost track of the swells and the stars even for too long, the whole mental map could slip. There were stretches of days when solid cloud cover hid the stars, the sun, and the moon completely. And still Mau held the canoe on course, reading the swells alone, keeping in his head an accurate running picture of exactly where the canoe was. And as they neared the end, it was a small white seabird, a fairy tern skimming over the water that told Mau land was near, pointing the way to an atoll just north of Tahiti before it was even visible. Everything the ancient stories described, the stars, the swells, the birds, all of it worked exactly as promised, in the hands of a man who truly knew. Think about what that voyage proved. It wasn't a legend. It wasn't luck. It was real, learnable, teachable, repeatable human skill. Mau Piailug proved in the modern age before witnesses that a human being with the right knowledge could do what the textbooks said was impossible. He rescued an entire science from the edge of extinction, and in doing so, he vindicated every one of his ancestors who had ever pointed a canoe at an empty horizon and trusted their minds to carry them home. So we've seen the how. Now let's ask the deeper question, the one that gets to the heart of who we are. Why? Why did they do it? Why would anyone climb into a small boat and paddle away from safe, solid land toward an empty horizon, risking everything with no guarantee that any land even existed out there at all? What kind of creature does that? The answer reveals something profound about the human mind, and it comes in two layers. The first is practical. Sometimes our ancestors had to move. A growing population, a stretched food supply, a conflict, a changing climate, all of these could push people to seek new land. When the island you live on can no longer feed everyone, the empty ocean stops being just a threat and starts being a possibility. Exploration in this sense was a survival strategy, a way of finding new homes and new resources to keep the people alive. But that practical explanation on its own doesn't fully capture it, because crossing an ocean you cannot see across toward land that might not exist is an extraordinary, almost irrational risk. Pure survival logic would often tell you to stay put to play it safe. And yet again and again, humans chose the horizon. This points to the second deeper layer, something in the human mind itself. A restlessness, a curiosity, a deep burning need to know what is out there over the horizon beyond the edge of the known. Scientists sometimes talk about this as part of our nature, as a fundamentally exploratory species. We are wired to be curious, to seek novelty, to wonder what lies beyond the next hill, the next river, the next sea. This drive is written deep into our psychology, and it may be one of the great secret engines of the entire human story. And there may be real biology behind it. Deep in your brain runs the same reward system we've met before, powered by the chemical dopamine, which fires not just when you get a reward, but when you seek one, when you explore, discover, and encounter something new. Novelty itself is rewarding to the human brain. Discovering something unknown gives us a genuine neurochemical hit of satisfaction. Some researchers have even linked certain variations in the genes involved in this dopamine system to traits like novelty-seeking and risk-taking, and intriguingly, these variants appear to be more common in populations whose ancestors migrated the farthest from Africa. It's a controversial idea and far from settled, but the notion is tantalizing that the very restlessness which drove humans to the ends of the earth might be partly written into our genes, a biological itch to move, to explore, to go. Whether or not the genetics hold up the pattern in behavior is undeniable. Humans are the animal that fills every corner of the planet, that climbs the highest mountains and crosses the widest seas, and now reaches for other worlds. Not because we have to, but because something in us needs to know what's out there. There's a psychological dimension too beyond the chemistry. To point a boat at an empty horizon requires not just curiosity, but a very particular relationship with fear. The Wayfinders and Voyagers were not fearless. They would have been foolish to be. The ocean was genuinely deadly, but they had learned to act in the presence of fear, to let their hard-won knowledge and their trust in their own skill carry them past the terror of the unknown. This is one of the most human capacities of all, to feel the fear and to go anyway, because the pull of what might lie beyond is stronger than the pull of safety. Every great human achievement, in a sense, lives in that moment on the beach, that choice between the safe known shore and the terrifying promising horizon. And again, our ancestors chose the horizon. This is the same impulse that led our ancestors out of Africa to spread across every continent, that led them across land bridges and through mountain passes, and yes, across open oceans. The human being is the animal that cannot stop wondering what's out there and cannot resist going to find out. The ocean crossings are perhaps the purest, most dramatic expression of that ancient, restless curiosity, the drive to explore taken to its most extreme and beautiful conclusion. And this brings us to the twist that reframes the entire story and everything you think you know about ancient people. We have this deep-seated bias, a habit of thinking that our ancestors were simple, primitive, less intelligent than us. We imagine cavemen grunting around a fire, barely surviving. But the story of ancient ocean voyaging shatters that image completely. Because to be a wayfinder was to be a genius. Consider what it actually required. A master navigator had to memorize the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars. They had to hold a mental map of an ocean thousands of miles wide. They had to read a dozen different kinds of natural signs simultaneously and integrate them in real time. They had to maintain in their head alone, without any written notes, a continuously updated model of their exact position on the trackless sea across a voyage that could last weeks. This is a feat of memory, observation, spatial reasoning, and mental discipline that would challenge the finest minds today. These were not simple people. They were some of the most sophisticated thinkers who have ever lived. Their intelligence just took a different form than ours, not written down in books, but held living in the mind, encoded in story and chant and hard-won experience passed from master to apprentice across the generations. We wrote our knowledge down and, in a way, let our memories grow weaker. They kept everything alive inside the mind and built memories more powerful than we can easily imagine. Here is the profound truth at the center of it all. The ancient navigators didn't lack technology. They had a technology every bit as powerful as a compass or a GPS. It was just a different kind of technology. It ran not on batteries or magnets, but on human memory, human observation, and human intelligence. The compass externalized navigation, put it into a little machine you could hold in your hand. The Wayfinder internalized it, built the entire system inside the human mind and body. And in many ways, the Wayfinder's way was more remarkable because it demanded so much more of the human being. A compass makes navigation easy. Wayfinding made navigators extraordinary. So think back to that person standing on the beach at the edge of the known world, looking out at an endless, terrifying ocean and choosing to get in the boat. We started by imagining them as brave, but perhaps foolish, leaping blindly into the unknown. But now you know the truth. They were not leaping blindly. They were carrying in their mind one of the most sophisticated bodies of knowledge our species has ever created. They knew how to read the stars and feel the swells, and follow the birds, and sense the invisible presence of land far over the curve of the world. They pointed their little boat at the empty horizon, not out of foolishness, but out of a magnificent combination of courage, curiosity, and staggering intelligence. Your ancestors crossed the widest oceans on Earth and found needles of land hidden in a haystack the size of a hemisphere with nothing but wooden boats and the power of the human mind. They colonized a planet before they had a single instrument to guide them. And they did it because they were exactly what you are, a creature that looks at a horizon and cannot help but wonder what lies beyond it, and is brave enough and clever enough to go and find out. The ocean was never the barrier we imagine. For a mind like that, the ocean was not a wall but a road. And the horizon was never an ending. It was an invitation. You come from explorers, from people who stood at the edge of everything they knew and chose the unknown, from navigators who held entire oceans in their minds, who felt the swells in their bones, who followed the stars home across water that had no roads. That blood runs in you. That mind is your mind. The same species that crossed the Pacific in a canoe is the species reading these words right now, and the horizon it chased is the same horizon that still tugs quietly at something deep in you. Some part of you has always known which way is home, and some part of you has always wanted to see what's out there. That is the oldest map of all, and you were born carrying it.